Ethan Cole stood frozen as the entire room stared at him, and the Admiral, who had just turned pale at the sound of that infamous call sign, Ghost 5, a name never meant to resurface in the world of the living. Ethan felt the old memories claw at the edges of his mind, trying to break through the fragile walls he had built to survive. After everything that had happened, he thought he had escaped this life forever, but fate had dragged him back to the place where his soul was first shattered, and molded into something no longer human. He tried to slow his breath to remain calm, yet the weight of countless unseen eyes pressed on him like a silent storm. The young pilots who moments ago had been excited and carefree before the ceremony were now absolutely still, almost afraid to even breathe near him. This man had walked into the room like an ordinary retired soldier, yet now stood revealed as a legend, from stories whispered only by veterans and commanders who remembered the Black. Operations that never made the news. Ethan wanted to slip away, but the Admiral ordered him to stay, insisting that the truth needed to be spoken and respect needed to be given, while Ethan could not deny the authority in the Admiral's voice inside. He wished to run far away because the truth was far from heroic. The truth was a nightmare carved into his bones as he took his place at the front. The projector behind them suddenly switched to an older classified image, faded and redacted. Except for one detail, the insignia of the Ghost Squadron, 5 wings surrounding a skull, an emblem representing the 5 pilots who flew missions that could never be acknowledged and were never meant to return. The audience watched, eyes wide, full of questions that would never be fully answered. Ethan felt like a relic on display, an artifact from a war no one was allowed to discuss. They had prepared this ceremony without knowing that one of those ghosts still walked this earth, and now the past was no longer silent. The Admiral tried to begin an introduction speaking of courage and sacrifice, but his voice shook more with each passing word. Ethan noticed his hands gripping the podium tightly, as if anchoring himself to reality, because everything, long buried, was rising again like a forgotten wreck climbing back from the bottom of the ocean. The Admiral glanced at Ethan for help, hoping the pilot would step in to continue, but Ethan simply lowered his gaze, thinking to himself that words meant nothing after all that had been lost. A living ghost had no speeches to give, only memories soaked in darkness and betrayal. Then one of the young officers, desperate for understanding, stepped forward with trembling curiosity and asked why the Admiral reacted the way he did. What made that call sign so terrifying? The Admiral stared at the officer for a moment, then sighed deeply before answering with a voice hollowed by guilt. Ghost 5 was declared dead. He said not missing, not captured, but dead, the kind of death recorded when there was absolutely no hope of survival. He explained how the report stated that Ethan Cole had perished in a fierce aerial battle over foreign territory. His plane last seen plunging into enemy mountains engulfed. In flames, Ethan watched the Admiral speak carefully, choosing each word, but truth flickered behind his eyes like a light struggling to survive. Inside a storm, Ethan could sense the tension build within the crowd, whispers rippling through the room. Thick with disbelief, some could not accept that the man standing before them had survived the impossible. Others simply stared at him like he was something supernatural. But Ethan ignored their reactions, focusing instead on steadying his racing heartbeat. He stood tall, not out of pride, but because weakness was never an option for someone like him who had been forged in the fire of the darkest missions. His silence spoke volumes more than any shadow of applause could offer. He had returned to the land of the living, yet he did not feel alive. Not yet. The Admiral asked Ethan if he would share anything about the final mission, the one that sealed his fate in the official records. Ethan did not respond right away. The truth was not just painful, it was classified, buried under layers of secrecy that even he was unsure he could break, but the Admiral insisted, saying that these pilots needed to understand the cost of the freedom they defended. Ethan finally nodded, deciding that maybe his suffering could serve a purpose, if it meant giving these young aviators a glimpse of the reality behind their dreams of glory. He took a step forward, and the silence in the hall deepened, like the world itself was listening. He began to speak, but with no pride and no desire for admiration. He told them the Ghost Squadron was formed for missions that were considered too dangerous for ordinary forces. Missions where success was measured by only delaying defeat missions where no help would ever come and survival was not expected. The pilots were chosen not because they were fearless, but because they were willing to face fear without hesitation and accept death long before stepping into the jet. Ethan explained how every mission was, flown with the knowledge that orders would never include a plan to bring them home. He recalled the night of that final flight, when they were sent deep into hostile skies to destroy a secret base hidden within mountains' radar, invisible to most, but not to them. The weather was violent and the air thick with enemy fire, yet the squadron pushed forward. One jet was hit, then another, until only Ethan remained, and although he completed the objective, his own aircraft was doomed, spiraling downward, into the heart of an unforgiving land. Ethan paused for a moment as he recounted the memory, his eyes losing focus, as though he were seeing the aftermath again. Enemies surrounding him, the pain of shattered bones and the echo of silence after screams were no longer possible. The young pilots listened in horror, their admiration now mixed with fear. Ethan continued explaining how he was captured, dragged into hidden cells, interrogated beyond the limits of endurance, and treated not as a soldier, but as a ghost, someone who theoretically did not exist because his government had already erased him from their ledger of the living. He spent years waiting for death. Yet it never came, only more suffering and more nights drowning in darkness, hoping that someone somewhere still remembered his name, but no one did, not even the men he had died to save, or so he thought. Years passed until a moment of chaos allowed him to escape, crawling through forests, mountains, and desert lands, traveling without identity or hope, eventually reaching safety far from home. But instead of welcoming arms, he was met with suspicion and silence, because how could a dead man return to life? Ethan said he had been asked to disappear, and he did, choosing exile over the cruel reminder that his sacrifice had been discarded like a secret, best forgotten. He thought hiding would protect his sanity, but the nightmares followed him, proving that ghosts could never escape themselves. The room remained silent as Ethan stepped back, his breathing heavy, yet his expression cold, like a man who had surrendered his emotions long ago. The Admiral looked devastated, knowing that this truth was a wound he helped create, one he was now forced to face. The pilots knew now that legends were not built from glory but from loss and scars hidden deep beneath uniforms and medals. They could never understand the true weight Ethan carried. But in their eyes, something changed. Respect replaced curiosity, and awe replaced ignorance. They no longer saw a mysterious relic. They saw a survivor of a war beyond imagination. The Admiral declared that Ethan would be honored tonight, whether he wished it or not, because the truth demanded justice, and a ghost deserved his name returned to the living. But Ethan felt uneasy, as if the shadows of his past were gathering behind him, ready to strike back, exposing what still remained hidden. He sensed something was coming, a threat larger than applause or recognition, something connected to the mission that was never truly finished. Ghost 5 had returned, but so had the enemies who once hunted him. Eyes watched from afar, unseen forces stirring awake as the legend resurfaced, and the storm of truth prepared to break free. Ethan Cole remained still as the applause slowly faded, leaving behind a heavy air that carried more questions than celebration. He felt exposed, like a spotlight had been forced upon a man who wished only to stay hidden. The Admiral moved beside him, speaking with an unsettled tone saying that the United States Navy owed him far more than medals or words. But Ethan looked into the Admiral's eyes and saw something else, something darker, something that told him this ceremony was not just about honor. It was about unfinished business secrets buried so deep that even ghosts could not rest until they were dragged into the light once again. The young pilots surrounded Ethan after the announcement, their eyes filled with awe, curiosity, and a hint of fear. Some reached out to shake his hand. Others hesitated, unsure whether touching a ghost would make them carry the same curse. But Ethan kept his responses short, his mind drifting back into the nightmarish memories of captivity and pain. The faces of his fallen squadron flashed before him, 5 pilots sent to their deaths, and only he crawled back from the edge of hell. His survival was not a miracle, but a burden he had carried alone for years, praying the world would never learn what truly happened. As the hall emptied, the Admiral asked Ethan to follow him into a private briefing room, far from listening ears, the walls lined with decades of classified missions and photos of crews lost to history. The Admiral locked the door behind them, his hands slightly shaking as if he feared what they were about to discuss. Ethan sat down, but remained alert, his instincts sharpened by years of survival, telling him danger was never far even. In uniformed halls of safety, the Admiral paced, breathing heavily before he finally spoke, saying that the secret operation which Ethan believed had ended long ago was not over, and that someone or something was still targeting anyone connected to it. Ethan stared at him unmoving as the Admiral revealed that a week ago, one of the Ghost Squadron commanders was found dead. The cause ruled a heart attack, but intelligence suspected otherwise. The Admiral pulled out classified documents and photographs showing unmarked vehicles, suspicious figures, and encrypted transmissions intercepted from foreign networks. The enemy Ethan once escaped from was back, and they were looking for the man who vanished from their cages, the only man who still had knowledge of what their secret base truly contained, knowledge worth killing for. Ethan felt his pulse quicken as he realized he had not escaped his past. It had simply been waiting for him. The Admiral continued, saying that if Ethan had returned to the U.S., enemies would have already found a trace, so it was only a matter of time before they made their move. Ethan clenched his fists, silently cursing the fate that refused to grant him peace. But before he could respond, the lights suddenly flickered, then died, plunging the room into complete darkness. The Admiral reached for the emergency phone, but his hand stopped mid-air as red backup lights powered on and alarms began blaring throughout the base. Ethan stood instantly scanning the room, sensing the threat closing around them as footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, multiple boots moving with discipline, precision, and intent. Armed shadows forced their way into the building, their movements silent but deadly. The Admiral stated the base was under attack, but Ethan already knew the enemy had come for him. He grabbed the Admiral's shoulder, pushing him behind the steel desk as bullets shattered the glass windows, peppering the walls with debris. Ethan has no weapon, but he had instincts sharp as knives. He moved with a swiftness that surprised even himself, finding an emergency cabinet, smashing it open, and pulling out a handgun loaded and ready. The sound of advancing assassins grew louder, their breaths steady, steps confident they believed the ghost was trapped again, but Ethan Cole refused to be captured ever again. The first intruder entered, and Ethan fired precise shots, taking him down without hesitation. The Admiral stared shocked at the transformation. Before him, Ethan was no longer a guest of honor, no longer a survivor of a tragedy. He had become Ghost 5 again. The weapon felt familiar in his hand, an extension of his will forged through agony and survival instinct alone. More assailants rushed in, but Ethan moved like he was dancing with danger, dodging, flipping the table for cover, and eliminating threats with cold efficiency. He grabbed a radio off one of the fallen enemies, hearing foreign voices speaking codes that confirmed what he feared. These were not ordinary terrorists. They were the same enemies from his past, the ones who had tortured him, hunted him, and sworn that he would never die peacefully. The Admiral now understood the truth. Ghost 5 had returned, but so had the war that was erased from every file and every memory. The base sirens activated emergency lockdown doors, slamming shut, dividing the attackers throughout the hallways. Ethan pulled the Admiral to his feet, commanding that they reach the secure bunker. Before more reinforcements arrived, the Admiral followed, breathless, terrified, yet determined to survive long enough to reveal what had remained hidden. Ethan led the way, moving through smoke-filled corridors, guiding the Admiral towards safety. But danger lurked around every corner, and he could feel eyes tracking them like predators stalking wounded prey. As they reached the bunker, several young pilots joined them, weapons drawn and fear in their eyes. Ethan saw their resolve and realized that the new generation was about to face the same kind of invisible war that consumed his life. He pushed open the bunker door, securing them inside, while alarms outside continued to roar. The Admiral activated encrypted communication to higher headquarters, requesting immediate military backup, but the signal was jammed. Ethan recognized the method of interference from his years in captivity. The enemy was not experimenting. They were executing a meticulously planned strike to capture or kill Ghost 5 and anyone who knew his story. Inside the bunker, the Admiral finally spoke the deepest secret he had carried. He told Ethan that the Ghost Squadron mission was never about destroying a hostile base, but about retrieving sensitive intelligence, linked to a rogue faction operating outside any government authority. He explained that this faction still existed stronger now than before, and they wanted revenge for what Ghost 5 had discovered. Ethan demanded to know what exactly this intelligence was, but before the Admiral could answer, the bunker door shook violently, explosives detonating outside, smoke and fire forcing through the cracks the enemy was breaching, and their hatred for Ghost 5 burned hotter than ever. Ethan grabbed a high-powered rifle from the weapon rack, adrenaline firing through his veins. He knew there was no running from this war anymore. He was the target and the only shield protecting everyone around him. He commanded the pilots to fall back through an escape route hidden behind the bunker wall, promising he would hold the line and cover their retreat. The Admiral refused to leave, stating that he would rather die than abandon the man who was wrongfully declared dead. Ethan stared into his eyes and nodded, knowing he finally had someone who understood the weight he carried. The bunker door buckled inward, sparks flying, and Ethan raised his weapon, ready to unleash the wrath of the forgotten soldier. The door exploded, and armed intruders swarmed in. But Ghost 5 was fury incarnate, each shot from his rifle, a message that he was no longer a prisoner, no longer a ghost, but a force determined to erase his hunters from existence. He pushed forward, driving the attackers back, their formation breaking. Under the relentless fire, the Admiral assisted, using a sidearm with surprising accuracy, proving he had once walked beside war himself. Together they created a wall of defiance, refusing to let the invaders advance, but sheer numbers overwhelmed them, and Ethan knew they could not hold forever. He ordered the Admiral to escape now that the path was clear. The Admiral hesitated, but Ethan shouted with a voice shaped by survival and sacrifice, telling him that this time no one was dying for nothing. The Admiral escaped through the hidden passage, taking the remaining pilots with him, leaving Ethan alone in the bunker with enemies closing from all sides. He moved strategically, retreating toward the far end of the room where he triggered a timed defense system that would seal the chamber and buy the others crucial minutes to flee. The invaders roared in anger, firing relentlessly, trying to pin him down, but he kept moving, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a cornered kill. Ethan Cole had been the last ghost standing once, and he would be again, even if it meant embracing the death he escaped years ago. Smoke thickened the air. Gunfire echoed like thunder, and Ethan continued to fight, every motion driven by rage, courage, and the unbreakable instinct to protect those who still had futures beyond war. He felt bullets graze his shoulder, pain, sharp but ignorable. He charged forward, grabbing a fallen enemy's weapon in his other hand, now firing 2 guns simultaneously. His determination unmatched his soul, burning with unfinished defiance, and just when the enemies began to regroup, the defense system ignited, sealing the bunker with a blast that sent flames roaring through the hall. The entrance collapsed, trapping. Enemies inside screams, swallowed by the explosion. Ethan fell to one knee, breathing hard, sweat and blood mixing upon his skin. But he was alive, still fighting, still refusing to rest. As silence settled, Ethan rose, using the last reserves of his strength. He limped through the secondary exit, slipping into the shadows outside the burning bunker. The base grounds swarmed with military support helicopters, circling and securing the perimeter. Yet Ethan did not step toward safety. He turned away instead, blending into the darkness, disappearing into the night, like he had never returned at all, because Ghost 5 was more than a call sign. It was a curse, and he would not let anyone else suffer. In the crossfire of his existence, he would hunt the ones who hunted him, finish the mission that tore his life apart, and ensure that the next generation could soar free without carrying the weight of forgotten wars. And somewhere far beyond the base, a voice whispered through encrypted channels confirming that Ghost 5 was alive and moving. The hunt was not over. The war had only just begun, and Ethan Cole now stood at the center of a storm that would decide the fate of countless souls in the shadows of a world that believed ghosts did not exist. But he was a ghost, and he was coming for them all. Ethan Cole disappeared into the night, guided by instincts sharpened through years of torment and survival. The base behind him still burned alarms, crying out like a desperate warning to the world that ghosts had awakened again. He moved swiftly through the coastal wilderness, ignoring the pain in his shoulder and the exhaustion clawing at his bones. His mission was clear. The enemy who destroyed his life, who buried his identity and hunted him across continents, would not get a second chance. Ghost 5 was returning to finish what destiny began. As military reinforcements secured the ruined base, the Admiral emerged from the secret escape tunnel, searching for Ethan among chaos. But the pilots informed him that the legendary man had vanished once more. The Admiral clenched his fists, determined not to fail again. He called for a full-scale operation, activating every classified asset.